Hello, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition, a podcast where we explore the landscape of the college theater world and try to demystify this daunting audition process. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, Director of MTCA, Musical Theater College Auditions, and today we have a wowzer of a show lined up for you. Alejandro Rodriguez is my best friend in this world and would have been officiant at my wedding. We've known each other since we were 16 years old, attending Carnegie Mellon's pre-college program, where I pulled him aside for wearing a baseball t-shirt and told him we would be best friends. And it turned out to be true. This is continuing a short series we're having with artists where we talk about their career journeys, but also get into some other topics that are related to the business. So Ale is a facilitator for EDIB conversations. That's equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging conversations professionally. And we wanted to have him on the pod so we could dive deeper into that discussion. I will tell you all just one story about Ale. We've done so many things together over the years, from living and teaching together to roasting fools on the basketball courts of NYC. But a few years ago, we taught a bonus class at TPAP together on being an artist advocate. And we set up the class like it was going to be a physical fitness class. I don't know why that was true, but like I had a whistle and I was like running up and down the stairs and doing push-ups. But then it ended up being a class on like how you can learn to be an advocate for your fellow artists, as opposed to the kind of person who's like kicking people below the ladder or pulling people down who are ahead of you. And I'll never forget just like Ale's speech about me when he introduced me, and then I had to introduce him, of like how we advocate for each other. Is like the most I've cried in public when not acting ever in my life. So even thinking about it now, you're gonna make me cry in this pod. Don't let me cry in this podcast, Meghan. It's not gonna happen. Today on the pod, we talk with Ale about his live journal when he was 16. That will, like 7 of you out there will know what a live journal is. We talk about loving theater, but maybe not loving auditioning. We talk about safety as it relates to some of these difficult conversations. We break down social identity and the difference maybe between identities that we claim and social identities that are put upon us. We talk about art at the center of movement work. We talk about people and organizations trying not to be canceled versus organizations being agents of change. Ale reminds you to trust your body. He gives you some Malcolm Gladwell style blink advice. Maybe trust your body more than your mind or the intellect. We talk about connecting with students with identifiers that you proudly wave, those banners that you wave, and what some of those other aspects of identifiers could be that go beyond just social identity. Ale mentions loving your mom. We talk about the difficulty of monetizing arts. And then we talk a little bit about writing and how most good writing happens in revision, and get just a bit into social media, where Ale reminds you that the platform can alter the message. But before we get to our episode with Ale, Meghan, did the people need to know the news, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be getting specific Charlie Murphy read ad reads at some point. We don't know exactly when it's going to happen. But if you've been listening to this podcast and thinking, I need more of Charlie's voice, you're about to get it.
It's what the people need, you know?
You give them what they want. They're just like, I'm listening to Survivor Pod already. I'm listening to Mapping the College Audition. But there's like all these, like Heidi Schreck gets in there and does a thing. We don't need all these like other celebrities. Other celebrities. You see what I just did there, Meghan? These other celebrities doing ad reads. I need Charlie to be doing them. Don't worry. Don't fear. Soon your podcast will have me reading the ads as well.
So if you've gotten in the habit of, pressing the 15-minute ahead button during ads, don't do that anymore, because you will
Meghan,
miss.
If they're hitting the 15-minute ahead button, that's a problem. We do not. If you're skipping 15 minutes, some of the ads are long, but they're not 15 minutes. If you skip like second, like 3 skips will normally do it. Not that we're telling you to skip the ads. That's what pays the bill.
15 seconds. But sometimes maybe 15 minutes.
Yep, for sure. You're like, next section. Up, Charlie's talking. Next.
Yeah.
Let's get to the interesting stuff.
Another sports analogy. Next.
That's why they listen, is for the sports analogies, Meghan. My God.
We are creating well-rounded students through this pod.
Ain't that the truth? Well, I think they're going to be a little more well-rounded after they hear this really fantastic episode with Ale. Let's get to it. Today is a special day. Today we welcome on Alejandro Rodriguez. my best friend in the entire world. Ale has a BFA from Juilliard. He's a writer, performer, and activist, as well as doing a lot of work on the other side of the table. As an actor, he's performed at the Kennedy Center, Guthrie Theater, Denver Center Theater, among many others. He's also written a number of plays and is a poet as well. He most recently was the Associate Artistic Director of Playmakers Theater in North Carolina and is currently serving as the Deputy Executive Director of A-Step, where he was the Artistic Director of A-Step's Artist as Citizen Conference. Aside from being a former MTCA monologue coach, he currently shares his expertise and talents with MTCA as the Deputy of Difference and Belonging for the team. He's been doing this kind of work for many different organizations for years now, which has recently led him to found Alejo Communication, where he's going to continue some of this facilitation work just now as a full-on boss. He's also, as an educator, been a lecturer at Juilliard, at UNCSA, at NYU, and many other colleges. He also would have been my wedding officiant if a wedding had happened, and is the godfather to my child. So a lot of responsibilities you're really going to hear about today. Ale, how are you doing? Welcome on the pod.
I am so overjoyed to be here, and that was very filling. I'm trying to hold all of that warmth and gladness from hearing you list all that. I feel tired having heard that bio, but it's something special to hear you say it back to me.
I've been telling Meghan for a while now, we need to shorten these bios. I'm giving too much bio. I'm like trying to do less for the bio. Let's get to the interview. Let them give the bio. This one I couldn't shorten. I was like, I had to add to it. I was like, no, we need more. I need more bio on this one.
You gotta hype them up.
Yeah.
We're really going to do like a 2-part interview with you. So we're going to do the sort of normal artist where we'll go through some different aspects of your career. And then I really want to get into some of these conversations that you are so expert at facilitating in the EDIB world. Before we do that, though, let's get into you as a youngin'. And this is so exciting for me because this is the first person I've asked these questions to. I've asked every artist so far questions about them looking at colleges, and you're the first person I actually know these answers to. So this is going to be very exciting. But take me back to when you're 16, 17, you're thinking about theater programs. Mm-hmm. If you had been precocious enough to have a mission statement for what you were looking for in a school, what would it have been? What would you have said you were looking for in a theater program or in a college experience?
Oh, wow. I'm glad that you were along for this part of the journey because you can sense check me on this. And I really welcome you telling me if you saw it quite differently. But I was very serious. I think bordering on self-serious. I mean, I don't think you would have gotten that impression just interacting with me.
Was?
Hey, take it easy. Take it easy. In that I think I knew that I wanted to make a living as an artist. I think I knew that it was a vocation, a calling, and at that point, however, I think I was open to many paths to get there. I think I remember writing something, and you remember this. So before the word blog had like real traction, there was online journals, and there was one that was quite popular then called Live Journal.
Live Journal. I'm glad you remember. Very good.
Charmer was one of my few followers on my Live Journal. And I wrote in one of the posts that what I wanted most was to meet and befriend and work alongside the artists who were going to be figuring out the new forms that would tell our story back to our moment. I probably had just read The Seagull and was like inspired by Kostia's like new forms, we need new forms. So I probably ran to my childhood desktop computer and typed out like, that's me in a bar in New York meeting the artists who are going to be developing new forms. And I would say I'm very proud to feel like that's been a part of the journey. And yet I don't think I could have anticipated what those new forms would have looked like and where they might have taken us. So that'll come further on in our conversation.
It sure will. And boy, I'm excited to get to those things. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about Juilliard. So we had Gabe on the pod. He talked a little bit about his experience at Juilliard. I'd love to hear a little bit for you. Like, give me like a couple words of what the experience of going to Juilliard was like.
Rigorous. Hogwartsy.
Perfect.
Especially early on, there was a feeling of like, I grew up in West Miami, which is like a suburb of Cuba, and I was in New York and listening to Chopin coming out of practice rooms and people spinning endlessly doing pirouettes in the room across the hall. And I was like, where am I?
A lot of broomsticks, I'm told, at Juilliard too.
There's a lot of broomsticks,
Mm-hmm.
but not used for flying. I don't think that's in the purview of our
Very
conversation.
tidy school.
Um, but also Juilliard is on its own journey. I would say I was very grateful for the faculty members who saw me. And then I also felt at moments lost in translation as well. And it was some of the people in the groups and the mentors that I met afterwards who helped me understand they're also on a journey. And as much as at that age, I think I saw them as like coming down with the stone tablets from Mount Sinai. They had a particular tradition, which won't surprise anyone, was a sort of European based theater. And I actually remember, this is part of where like this maybe seriousness came in high school. Through spoken word, I got to meet and be immersed in sort of like a non-white theater tradition, spoken word, hip hop theater, sort of the African griot tradition. And at Juilliard, didn't have much space. I continued to write, not as much maybe, but it really was about learning how to serve, playwrights who were writing most of the time kind of traditional dramatic structure plays. And my goodness, am I grateful. In particular, last thing I'll say, some of my friends, including Gay Biebert, who was my homie, the homiest of homies, uh, are still my closest friends and are extraordinary at what they do. Dancers, musicians. To know that I can go and meet someone at the stage door after their concert and tell stories about crazy nights we spent in Lincoln Center is a joy, and I will always be grateful for the school for that.
It's so cool. Now, especially from having taught now at a number of these universities, what do you feel like if you now could go back and add a class in, that would sort of speak to some of the things you felt like you were missing from school, whether it's you teaching that or you'd want someone else to come in and teach it? What's something that you go, I wish Juilliard could have added a little bit more of this into the program?
Oh, what a great question. I have two answers. One of them I think is already happening, which is making your own work. I think that's already starting to gain traction in programs. And it's really, the industry's changing. I know we'll talk about that. I know you've probably been talking about that with other guests, but one of the things is the platforms have democratized, especially because of many of them have gone digital. And so the Issa Rae model of, hey, the industry doesn't see me, but I know who I am, and so I'm gonna cut through the noise. That's a very important. And then I personally, we had theater history, but like I have this passion for helping artists understand context and how context shifts over time. I guess it's a theater history course, but I would love a sort of way in which artists are both subject to the context of their times and also creating the context of their times. So that is an economic analysis, that's a political analysis, that's a historical analysis, but just really being able to sort of be dimensional about the container in which you're working would be something I feel would be dope.
I love that for you, and I do think I would want you to teach that class. It's one of my favorite things after, like, when we see a show together. I feel like often I'll be in your realm if it's like modern politics, if it's about plays and like where they live in the world. I'm like, I can talk about that history. But the way that you'll sometimes be contextualizing the sort of history of art or the history of this moment and how that's been affected by previous moments, I'm always like, all right, I gotta listen for a second. I'm not even gonna talk back. I'm just gonna hear what Ale has to say here and take some of it in. It's a really cool perspective, I think, that you bring to art. So yes, no more compliments. It's the last compliment on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say mostly because I won't let you get a word in edgewise. You probably give up. You're just like, damn, man, this guy's dope boxing.
What do you feel like from Juilliard? What's like the biggest thing that you take away now as a multi-hyphenate professional? And we'll talk about some of those hyphens at different times. What is maybe the biggest thing you go, I'm so grateful I have this under my belt?
Craft. I went, Juilliard's a trade school in a lot of ways, and I really believe in the other path with the sort of liberal arts sort of kind of walk around the buffet, see what every sort of thread has to offer. But there's also something that
It's a buffet of threads. It's
buffet of
a
threads. I mix my metaphor.
sewing shop
Buffet
buffet.
of tastes of studies. You know where I was going.
I do.
I think the thing about going to such a hyper specific kind of vocational school is you recognize that um, craft is bottomless, and that in addition to wondering what's outside the box, you also can just keep going deeper into the box. Like
Mm.
there is even just simple scene work on a so-called traditional play can teach you about being human.
Mm.
Any single thing, if you look at it deep enough, can teach you about how to be better at being alive.
Mm.
And so to have a school tell you, like, you're going to spend 4 years and a lot of hours looking at this specific thing, it taught me something about craft I don't think I would have learned elsewhere.
So cool. Is there anything you feel like if you could go back and relive that time, what would you do differently? If you could be like, okay, I'm take 2. In this take, I'm gonna approach this differently, take this class differently. Is there anything you would change?
That's a precarious question, because I think in my own journey, I'm working on acceptance, and working on trusting that everything happened exactly as it was meant to be. So I'll say that first. But I guess that leads me to an answer, which is I wish I would have trusted my my body and my experiences, and not been so quick to assume I was just behind or less than. I think those moments where I was lost in translation, I always automatically assumed it was me and it was on me and I was falling short in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't always the case. I think everything I felt was legitimate and valid. And I try to tell my students that that's true for them as well. There's a reason why they're feeling misunderstood, or like they're not quite getting it. I was always quick to be like, bad Ale, you
Mm-hmm.
catch up. Gabe gets it.
Yeah.
Gabe understands.
Yeah. And I feel like if to throw in there, I mean, like, I think specifically, and a lot of people maybe feel this way, specifically when it came to like the more commercial things, when it came to the idea of, am I matching the commercial needs of this? Am I going to be ready for the business side of things? It felt like that would be the moments when I would watch you sort of self-flagellate. It would be like, oh, I'm not doing this in a way that's going to be sellable, or I'm not, am I doing this thing right for the sake of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, and that I think will come up a few times. I have a feeling we'll talk about this in a number of ways, but like when you're a young artist, I should say, when I was a young artist, all of those things are collapsed onto each other. Like your love for being in plays, your the social role you feel within this community, the the industry that surrounds it, your teacher's opinion of you. It's all just like one swirl. And as you get older, you're able to sort of separate those threads out and be like, oh, I can love being in plays and also not love auditioning for random strangers in like fluorescently lit closets, like, and that's okay. And that doesn't actually mean anything about my talent as an actor. It means one thing works really well for me and the other one is a less comfortable fit.
All right, we're going to play. This is going to be a very serious conversation in a lot of times, but we're going to play 2 very silly games. This will be the first of our silly games that everyone gets to play, and then we're going to play a specific silly game that I'm very proud of for us later in the pod. This is our college flashback round. You have 60 seconds on the clock, and we're going to see how many questions you can answer. I'm going to warn you, in our last episode, Sarah Salzberg broke the game. She got 14 correct. So that's an impossible standard. We leave that as a Wilt Chamberlain style record. You're just trying to be number 2. You're trying to get in that 10, 11, 12 range if we can.
Yeah. If I can be Kobe or AI, I'll just try to be Iverson on this one.
Just be Iverson, yes. And we need some more basketball. This pod, Megan's been saying there's not enough basketball on this pod yet, so I'm trying to get a little more in there.
Well, you didn't mention my point guard skills in the bio. That's the only
It'll come up. It'll come up. Trust. Could you trust? Unbelievable. Okay, are you ready?
Okay, yes.
60 seconds are on the clock.
Ready, set, go.
Favorite show you did in school?
The Greeks.
Hardest class for you?
Suzuki.
Something on the dorm room wall you remember.
A picture of a New York City ballerina that I dated.
Most consecutive hours awake in school.
Oh my God. 26.
Ever slept through a class?
Yeah, big portions of it.
School alumni you wanted to be when you grew up.
um, I thought of somebody, but he didn't go to my school. Let's say Anthony Mackie.
Part you played in college you'd go back and play again if you could.
Yeah. Waffles and Uncle Vanya.
Song that was blasting through your dorm room at school.
The Mountain Goats. This year.
What was on Broadway you were dying to be in?
The Pillow Man.
Did you vote in college?
Yes.
Do you remember your school mascot?
No, I didn't even get close.
Not even close. It's alumni throws out. It's tough because you have a lot of successful alumni. That's a tough one for a Juilliard grad.
And I went to school wanting to be Ed Norton, so all I could think about, the thing that was stuck was I was like, Ed Norton, but he didn't go there.
You're looking at that ballerina, you're hearing the Mountain Goats and Ed Norton. You can't even think about anyone else.
Yo, that is too real. I seriously just got the heebie-jeebies going through that.
Nobody would have fact-checked you, by the way. If you said Ed Norton, nobody would have come back. I'd have been like, oh yeah, Juilliard, that sounds right. Like, it sounds right.
You don't know how prideful we are. I would have gotten email and people would have slid up in my DMs.
They're like, Ale, you're wrong. Okay, great. Let's take a super quick break. And on the back end of the break, we're going to get into the meat of some of this conversation that we're dying to get to. So back in a flash. All right, we're back with Ale. And we really want to get into the meat of this conversation because I'm so excited to talk about some of this stuff with you. Like we did with Carrie and mental health, and we did that 2 weeks ago, I'd really love to focus on some different groups of our listeners. We're going to start with kind of the wide view, and then we're going to zoom in on some specific different groups. So I'll try to highlight those when I'm asking those questions. And as always that we do, we'll zig and zag wherever the conversation takes us. We did a version of this for our alumni students. We did like an alumni pilot program last year where we had the conversation of what does it mean to be an artist in the world today? Mm-hmm. And we talked about a bunch of different stuff. We talked about that in the context of the pandemic. We talked about that in terms of what is virtual and how that affects arts. And we dove deep into some of these EDIB concepts. Today, I think I'd love to just narrow our focus a little bit on the EDIB conversations, as we are talking a lot about the pandemic and virtual in so many of our pods. But it feels like this conversation we flirted with a lot. We haven't really gotten deep into with the artists. We've talked with each of the colleges a bit about it, about what they're doing. But I'd love to kind of have maybe an artist-centric version of that same conversation. Mm-hmm. So, as we know, many people are having these kinds of conversations of how can I create a more inclusive organization? How can I be a better ally? What is my place in the theater world of 2021? All those kinds of questions. And I just love to hear us dive a bit into that discussion. I'm going to start off with a little caveat acknowledgement of us both being cis straight men having this discussion. So this is in no way a comprehensive version of the discussion. And of course, we're going to continue to have different viewpoints on the pod to give us different perspectives and further our collective learning. Do we have to give any more acknowledgments on your end?
Yeah. Well, I mean, since you mentioned our social identity, there's so much more to it. And I'm sure maybe some of it will come up in our conversation, but since you can't see us, we're light-skinned. We're both light-skinned. Charlie is of European heritage. I'm a white passing Latino. And that's also, I guess, important to know kind of part of where we're coming from.
Absolutely. So you've been doing a lot of this work, and we'll call it maybe facilitation work, for lack of a better word, for many years now. I'd love just to hear a little bit from an overview perspective of like, what has your learning been in the past year? So like, especially as you facilitated so many of these conversations and the ways they've changed, what has this year brought you that feels new or that feels like a piece of learning for you personally?
Oh my God, so much. So much. I think the first thing that just comes to mind to talk about is a much deeper understanding about safety and levels of safety, which is a prerequisite to belonging. For those who are unfamiliar with that acronym, right? EDIB, one of the many sort of sequences of letters. This one, it refers to equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Oftentimes I add the word safety in my discussion, safety and belonging, or safety and inclusion, because there are many ways to have this conversation. But a sort of straightforward way is like our bodies are always asking, am I safe? There's actually the oldest part of our brain, what many call the reptile brain, is, and its sort of close cousin, the limbic brain. Those are two that really house kind of our threat detection systems, and they're happening they're operating all the time, and beneath our consciousness, and they're really just asking, "Am I safe?" all the time. And the thing is, it's not just like, is there, safety in terms of overt like physical harm. They're asking like, is there going to be a harm to my identity? Is there going to be harm to my sense of truth? Is there going to be harm um, to my esteem, to my self-esteem? And so the more I get to work with across different groups, cultures, languages, the more I recognize, or I start to sensitize myself to the diverse safety needs that people bring into the room. And when we talk about privilege, which I know can be a charged word, um, one of the things that we're talking about is that certain uh, bodies are just more likely to feel safe in rooms and in institutions, just because those rooms and institutions were built with them in mind. You didn't build those institutions in those rooms. You didn't found them. They probably predate you, but they were built with you in mind, because the people who built them look like you, or their children look like you, and so they took great care to make sure you were going to feel seen and safe. And so when somebody from a vastly different with a vastly different lived experience comes into those rooms, there's a journey to safety. And the best facilitators, the best educators are sensitive to that, and they walk alongside that student, and they invite. Well, I guess they just they make it. They attend to those needs, because without safety, there is no risk taking. There's no true encounter. There's no real deep learning that can happen, because the thing that's getting the most blood in your brain is those old parts of your brain that are like, is somebody going to come for me right now? Is somebody going to is somebody going to misgender me? Is somebody going to speak to me in Spanish randomly? Is somebody going to like what? I'm on the defense, so
It's so interesting because we've had like a number of different versions of these conversations. Of course, you and I personally, but now also in some public spaces over the course of the past year. It's so interesting. This is the first time that's happened since I've become a parent. And so much of what like early childhood development is about is the same shit.
yes,
Like it's the same, like
yeah,
the reptile brain, like, can you not get the cortisol levels up? And
yeah.
it's like even some of the same words of like, so that they are able to grow. So their brains are able to develop and grow in a healthy way. So they're not constantly in fight or flight. So they're not constantly freaked out because where's mom?
Yes, and I want to just add that I, as someone who came from a non-white culture, because I am white passing, but the peculiarity of the neighborhood I grew up in, like there were not a lot of European heritage people. I think Charlie was my first white friend. I really I mean that. And so I navigated sort of PWIs, what we call predominantly white institutions. And so I also want to address this from the other end, which is my interest is also to help resource our students. The institutions must change, and many of them are reckoning with that, some more effectively than others. But also there's the part of it which is like, I want the young people that I'm working with to know that we can become more and more aware of what's happening in our body. We can start asking ourselves, is this a threat to my safety? How do I find safety? What avenues do I have? What access do I have? So that we can also, grow more resourced as we navigate a world that is changing, but isn't going to change fast enough to accommodate all of us. You know what I mean? And
Totally.
so just wanted to add that.
I'd love to, because I think you're kind of rightly pointing out that I jumped kind of right in the middle of this conversation. What if we take a little bit of a step back as we're talking about words like social identity? Can we give a tiny bit of an overview and a bullet point of like, what do we mean when we're talking about different identities, our different social identities, how we navigate the world? Could we just give a definition for anyone who maybe doesn't know that?
Yeah, sure. We all have membership in these various identity groups. When we talk about social identity, we talk about them that way because they're socially constructed. They're not like biologically true. Like there's no part of my anatomy that is Cuban, but I belong to the identity group of, Cuban American, if you will. Same thing with well, it's one of the things we're talking about, gender, right? Like there's these categories of male female that are so imprecise with regards to our actual beautiful biological complexity, and there are many of our sisters and brothers and non-binary friends who are rightfully chafing against those like, what the fuck, two options? Like that shit does not begin to suffice, um, and I want to say some of these identity groups we proactively subscribe to. Like there are people who will wave an identity banner proudly. Like I proactively choose the identity group of Cuban American. You know, and and then there are others that are projected onto us. Um, that people will either look at us or hear us and sort of shove us in one of these social identifiers, whether or not we've claimed it, which is one of the reasons why some of the things that the great facilitators and educators and scholars are really advocating for is that we do our best to let people self-identify. We're pushing into a world of people allowing to say their names the way that they want to be said, to name their pronouns, because we recognize we're just off to a safer foot when people can actually choose their social identity for themselves.
I love it. And we're going to talk a lot more about social identity, especially we get into some auditions and maybe especially with some of these specific groups. But I'd love to talk a little bit about, if we're going to carefully and in quotes use the word like political, if someone has a political agenda, let's say, how do you see artists with a political or social agenda? What is our role as an artist, right, in movement spaces, and how has that maybe changed in the past 10 years? And then I'd also love to talk a little bit maybe about like range of engagement. Like, do you have the option as an artist to say, I'm not really a political artist. I'm just going to try to do my job and say the words, or is there such thing as too political? Like, how do you feel like in terms of the navigating that of like, I don't know how much I should or shouldn't engage with some of these conversations as an artist in the world?
So this is the moment Charlie knows really well, and it's either going to be charming to folks or they're going to be like, this guy is way too much. But
cut him out.
Yeah, cut him out. The first thing that we would need to do is we need to examine that word political, because it's important for me to be able to give you a clear answer. Political, it comes from I'm confident a Greek word polis, which just means city, right? People who live among.
This is the theater history class he's teaching right now.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. And I told you, some people are turning off this podcast right now.
They turned it off a while ago, Ollie. Don't worry.
Hey, come on, man. Is this what he's supposed to do? Meghan, help me out here. This is what he's supposed to do? This is gracious host behavior?
No, I'm going to cut him out. Don't worry. Instead of cutting you out, I'm going to cut Charlie
out. I bring that up because if you live among other humans, you are a political being. If you cohabitate in a bioregion and you share resources, whether it's water or electricity, or highways, you are political, whether you identify it as not, because that's what that word means in its sort of root. I think a lot of times the way I think you were hinting at, and the way I think we use it in the US in 2021, is talking about electoral politics. In our country, right, we have a representative democracy, we have a two-party system. And so the question becomes, how should artists engage with that system, and how might they engage with that system? And my answer is, I don't know. I do know you mentioned movement work, right? And I want to share that we are part of those of us who feel like we are engaged with or contributing to movements for justice around the world, are part of a continuum that predates this country, right? Movements for gender equality, movement for just justice on a number of racial justice, movements for environmental justice, economic justice, right? So when Charlie says movement work, he's talking about part of the continuum of movement workers. And there are people who have given their whole lives to this. I very much feel mostly a cheerleader and a contributor with my own in my own way, but I admire the heroes and the heroes of my life are the ones who are on the front lines in movement work and have given much more of their time to it than I have. Art has always been not adjacent, but art historically has always been at the center of movement work, and that is within electoral politics, but also outside of electoral politics. You probably the easiest U.S. example is civil rights and the songs, the protest songs, and the incredible music that came from that movement that lifted people's spirits, that gave them a vision of the mountaintop, that gave them fuel in their tanks when their tanks were running on empty for many good reasons. That again is older than our country. So culture and storytelling and music has been central to the movements for justice that have existed. So please, if you make art, I would definitely, we need you and we want you, and please join us. Whether you are drawn to trying to impact electoral politics in this country is a very personal decision. It can get freaking exhausting. The systems that we have, that we were born into, appear broken, and maybe we're designed broken. You know what I mean? And so I really admire the folks who are saying, you know what, I want to pass on a more repaired system or on a improved system. And I also completely respect those who say, listen, I can get more done outside of electoral politics. Neither party represents me fully, and so I'm trying to organize my neighborhood. I'm trying to get clean water to you know, like I'm all for it because we need it all. We need it all.
Well, and I'm so interested in, regular listeners of this podcast will know we love making our sports analogies, and Ale and I will talk a lot about us with sports, and we're huge sports fans and sports players. And I was saying, sports players makes it sound like it's a lie, but we really do.
Yeah, when you say sports players, it doesn't sound like you know that much about sports, to be honest.
Sports ball doers, we do the sports balls. But it makes me think of MJ, like Republicans buy shoes too, or whatever. Was really a thing, and I think he chose always to be sort of a non-political artist, especially athlete in that case. And I think about like athletes today, and I don't know how much you've been following the Kyrie Irving not anti-vax thing, but he is now right now like leading a kind of anti-vax movement. It's like there is kind of no such thing as an apolitical athlete anymore, and I kind of wonder, I'm like, is that true of especially successful artists too, that we go, what's on their Instagram? What do they believe in? What do they, that there sort of becomes an expectation of apolitical is not really a choice.
Right. Well, and it's funny because that's a great example. Like, to parse that out a little bit, MJ is kind of making a comment about electoral politics, like, oh, I don't choose parties, but the black folks in my community who take offense at that, or who have shared their perspective, is like, you don't get to choose. You're black. Like, that is you're part of this community that is suffering so much in this system, and you can't really opt out, or they feel like you oughtn't. And so it's complex, man.
Before we dive too deep into those small groups, I just, from a broader perspective, I know I talked specifically about 2021 and learning. I just would love to hear now, from the facilitation work you're doing with organizations, how are they asking different questions than they were, let's say, 10 years ago or whatever? And in the course of this work, how has the conversation shifted on the, whether we call it the corporate level or the nonprofit large organization level, right? The different kind of places you've worked with, where do you see them changing their mind, or them having new learning, or them moving in different directions, if they are?
Yeah, I mean, there's a vast spectrum. I've had I'm really grateful for like a real diverse set of experiences, and I'm sure this won't surprise folks who are in this field or adjacent to it, but like there's everything from people who seem to really just be worried about compliance and not getting dragged or canceled. And then on the other end, you have people who are genuinely trying to radically rethink the systems of their organizations and their companies. Most of the organizations that I'm engaged with are somewhere in the middle, and there's variance obviously among them. Um, they're not necessarily trying to uproot their org chart, but they're also beyond just a sort of superficial, like we just don't want to get in trouble, or at least they certainly don't share that with me. And there's a wide territory in the middle of work that can be done. And I know fellow facilitators. And to be clear, the word facilitator means to make a process easier. The way I contribute to this is I help folks have conversation, in particular across difference, to help people understand each other, to get clear on their intention, and to sort of develop action plans to pursue their intentions. I'm not an anti-racist scholar. I learn from anti-racist scholar. I'm not a queer theorist. I'm not a I am a disciple of those teachers, and so I'm always very clear when an organization reaches out to me, like, this is how I can help. I can help you all create community agreements. I can help you clarify and articulate what your intentions are. I can even send you some people who can take you to the next step if what you're looking at is for like some anti-racism training. I know some incredible facilitators and trainers. But there's a lot in the middle. Some folks are just wanting help to have difficult conversations that they know they haven't had or haven't had enough of. Others are looking for like more structural help, like to make more equitable structures, thinking about like pay and time off and communication systems and all the various structural pieces that make an organization more or less equitable. So
well, and that leads me right into the, now let's talk specifically to those, let's say 15 to 18-year-old or 14 to 18-year-old students who may be listening, and they're starting to investigate the college process, and they're maybe listening to this podcast and hearing college after college kind of read their diversity statements. How do I, as a 16-year-old, navigate that in terms of telling the difference between these schools that are talking about it, and if this is something that is important to me and I want to hold them accountable? How do I, as a student, kind of navigate the language I'm hearing versus actions that I'm seeing, et cetera, from these different schools?
Great question, and thank you to bringing me back to something that might be more relevant. I guess I would want to start by saying trust your body. In those rooms, trust your sense of safety and of comfort. No matter what someone says, there's a lot of good, pretty talkers out there. You might be listening to me and be like, what a pretty talker. That's what strings.
No one was thinking that. Don't worry, Ali. No.
I like you so much. Trust your sensations in a room. Like you know when your shoulders drop and you take a deep breath, and you also know when you walk out of a room and you've been holding your breath the entire time. Trust that more than language. Also, the parts of your identity that you celebrate, that you really take pride in, and you have a sense of self, find out how others who have shared that identity group have fared in those buildings. I think schools should be ready and able to connect you with people who share the identity, the identifiers that you do. And I'm not projecting onto you. I'm not saying it has to be your gender or your race or your sexuality, but whatever ones are you do lead in the world with. And I always say, like, the banners you proudly wave. I think you should connect with people who have spent time in those buildings and be like, how was it for you? Did you feel seen? Did you feel like you were supported? Those are two things that come to mind.
I love it. Well, and it leads me right to a difficult conversation that I feel like you are as qualified almost as anyone, because you have both some of this knowledge, but also some artistic knowledge to bring to the table with this. Because it's something we talk a lot about at MTCA, is like, how do we help students lead with, you called them banners, lead with how they want to lead identity-wise? So meaning that they are comfortable to showcase and inform us of whatever identity they want to wear, but aren't maybe forced to do pieces that showcase specific identities because they think they're supposed to, right? How do we have those conversations without feeling like we're actually putting students in boxes? Our listeners have heard me rail against type a lot, right? So meaning like you have to do certain pieces because you look like an ingenue or you look like the girl who did the part on Broadway. But how does that conversation about type then sort of square with different conversations about identity and how you can potentially lead in the room identity-wise?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's hard to be formulaic. I mean, I guess one tried and true that you've probably heard me say in my position as deputy of difference and belonging for MTCA is with regards to personal identity. Good rule of thumb is uh, in your own time and on your own terms. So no one should be rushed. No one should be told, "Hey, you have this amount of time to tell me these amount of things about yourself." Um, and I would say with gentle encouragement, I would say that since the world, and not just the theater and acting industry, but the world is going to project these identity groups onto you, it's never too early to start asking yourself, like, which ones do which one feel like me,
Mm.
and which ones can I really take pride in? Like maybe, I got to be honest. I've never really taken pride in my straightness, maybe
Mm-hmm.
because straight men have wreaked so much havoc in the world. But I honestly, I name that because it's important for me to be transparent. But like, I've got no pride in it. I have not done any studying about the legacy of straight people in the planet. I mean, you don't need to because it's literally what everyone teaches you at all times. Um, but the parts of my identity that I do feel like, oh, I do feel that way. I love black beans and rice. I love Gloria Stefan. I was raised. I can like rep that. I can rep that proud. Um, then I get to take pride in the continuum I'm a part of. Um, and it should show up in my work because that's the part of me that makes up my special sauce, and it should be part of the pieces I lead with in auditions. It should be part of the material, the writers that I'm getting to know, not exclusive, because
Mm-hmm.
the one other thing I'll say is there's a lot of other parts of your identity that are not your social identity, right?
Yes.
You might be a lover of chocolate. That's part of your identity. You might be a laying on your back sleeper. You might be a pickup basketball player. You might be a trumpet enthusiast. You might be a documentary watcher. You might be a Francophile. Like, those are not part of your social identity, but they
Mm-hmm.
might also be just as important to who you are. You might be you know, me and Charlie love our mamas. We're a part of the identity group of people who love their mamas. Like, I'll take pride in that. If you give me a piece
Yeah,
about someone who loves their mama, I'm gonna kill that shit. I'm gonna nail that shit. Um,
absolutely.
um, and I want the people listening, especially the young people, to also feel like they can take great pride in things, in other parts of their introversion, their extroversion, their analytical
Yes.
brains, their et cetera, et cetera.
I feel so strongly about that. And I don't feel that I know exactly the right way to have all these conversations, but it does feel like it needs to lead toward freedom as opposed to toward boxing yourself in. It has to be that the way you're able to wave these banners is a way that makes you feel more free, more able to express yourself, as opposed to feeling like I have to do this because I am X.
Yes.
Feels like, ooh, just not especially not the college process, since it is such an open-ended essay. You do get to write the musical Charlie Murphy exclamation point. So it's like, what do you want to actually bring in and put into that? It should be hopefully a freeing conversation and not one that feels like it's limiting.
And I think one of the things that that supremacy, and whether that's male supremacy or heterosexual supremacy or white supremacy, has done that actually inhibits is when you feel like you're the neutral, like you don't have a social
Mm-hmm.
identity. It actually makes you self-conscious and insecure around difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or it can, I don't want to say it does, it can make you think it's a threat to you that somebody comes and claims black power or brown power or queer
Mm-hmm.
pride, right? Because suddenly you're like, wait, but I don't know what. And I feel like one of the journeys that my white friends have been on is that sense of, some of them, a sense of like insecure, a sense of like, wait, but what does this mean about me? What do I take pride in? And I think you named it. Like, what a beautiful world to live in when you can say, like, I'm waving my banner of loving the Miami Heat, and I'm waving my banner of being a lover of my mama, and I have
Mm-hmm.
European heritage. My people come from Germany and Ireland, and oh my God, let me tell you, oh, you're Haitian? Amazing. Tell me about Haiti. What food do you love? You know what I mean? Like, um, then all of a sudden difference becomes something that we savor, and we don't tolerate it or navigate it. We freaking pursue it because it makes
Mm-hmm.
everything taste better. You know what I mean? And it is about freedom. You're right. Freedom is the ultimate goal. Freedom, love and justice.
And I know you talked a little bit about this in terms of sort of at your own pace, but I'm also kind of fascinated by, especially with this age group, working with 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, where not everyone knows every answer about their own social identity, maybe especially in conversations about gender or sexuality. How would you advise a young person who is still navigating that journey to live in the kind of beautiful vulnerability of uncertainty without maybe feeling like they're saying something about themselves that they're not sure of, or they're not ready to say? But if they, let's say they've heard our advice of like, it's great to be vulnerable, it's great to be out there and struggle with the questions. It's like, how do you do that in the context of social identity, with material maybe for colleges?
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I could think of is, like, start with the things that you know, and not know even in an intellectual way, but know because you have body information that that, oh, I feel comfortable in this space, in this environment, with these people. Look, you know what kind of music you like, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
your body tells you what kind of music you like. Your body tells you whether you're more comfortable in the knowledge bowl or the volleyball team. You know what I mean? Like, start with the things that you can feel confident, and then let yourself be in a process of discovery with the rest. um, and if an adult or someone older who's had more time to figure it out seems like they're pressuring you to have an answer, I guess I would encourage you to say, I'm in a place of discovery with that.
Mm-hmm.
I've got more questions than answers with that. I'm still figuring that out, you know. um, and and I think let us older folks uh, slow our roll and give you the time, because
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it's a beautiful place. If you don't know yet and you have questions, I want to say, like, your life will lead you to the answers, and it's okay. Have patience. That's what I guess I've used a lot of words to get to. Have patience with yourself.
Mm, I love it. Let's transition to parents a little bit. I'm putting this question in the parents category, though I really think it could be any of our groups who maybe identify in the more privileged identity categories, whether that's like white, cis, male, straight, Christian, etc. But I think I see this line of conversation verbalized, especially by some of our MTCA parents. What would you say to maybe a well-intentioned parent who says, "Oh, my daughter has no chance to get into Carnegie Mellon because she's white. She's a white girl."
Yeah. Um, well, I mean, the first thing that I would do is I would recognize, I would try to first of all, if I'm triggered by that because I'm one of the people who schools are making more space for, I'd have to first notice, okay, what's my body doing? Do I feel safe? And I'd breathe, because ultimately on the other side of um my own trigger, I would recognize that it's coming from a place of fear.
Mm,
It's coming from a place of pending or impending loss. And there's nothing that will get you more into your fear-based, emotional, defensive place than some harm or loss coming to your children.
mm,
So I first would want to just see this person who I really believe more often than not is just saying, I'm worried about my child's future.
mhm,
And I would want to first of all meet that and reckon with that. Um, and then I guess I would just I don't know. I think this is very context specific, Charlie. So I worry about sounding like I'm giving a sort of formula response, because I don't think there is one. This would all be based on what I know about this person. Um, but I probably would get curious as to where they got this impression from, because
mm,
we all know that there are still plenty of slots at great schools for students of European heritage. The material that's out there is predominantly is statistically there's much more material out there that they can do, that they can fit, that fits them. And so part of what I do, hopefully with generosity, is sort of be like, where are you getting this impression, and let's break it down, because it could be that it's more fear-based than fact-based. And then ultimately, one other thing that I'd be curious about is like, where do we have alignment? For example, is this person a believer in fairness, right? Equity is a fancy word for fairness. If I can get an impression that they're a believer in fairness, then I can help them then I can maybe more likely help them understand that really schools are just trying to get more fair in their processes, right? Like, and if that means that the proportions of students change, if you are truly fundamentally a believer in fairness, then that should be a good thing, right? Also, one part of alignment that I would check in on is like, do they share with me a sense of the value of difference? Because if they do, then I can tell them, you should be excited by these changes, because the school your daughter or son goes to is going to be such a more inspiring place, because they're going to be colliding with these other vantage points, and they're going to make friends with people from different walks of life and make art with people who see the world differently. You should be thrilled that your daughter or your son's going to come out not only a better artist, but probably a better person from these programs.
It's so true that the conversation with Ryan talked a bit about this on his episode, and has in these conversations a lot sort of brought a lot about this conversation brought back to excellence, of like, we're actually increasing excellence, and that this will make a better program for your daughter wherever she ultimately goes to.
That was Ryan
again,
Quinn.
to your point. Yeah, Ryan Quinn, smart guy.
Just listen to what Ryan Quinn, whatever Ryan Quinn said. You should have told me he's been on here before. I would have answered that way.
What about, maybe let's talk to the parents of a student who maybe comes from an identity that is traditionally underrepresented in the theater/musical theater world. So let's imagine you're also listening to this pod. Thank you, parents. And you hear these colleges and you hear the industry screaming about representation that they're going to give. Would some part of you be skeptical? And I'd love to kind of hear maybe about, from your parents' perspective, was that something that ever came up with your parents in terms of your representation in the industry, and was that going to be an extra struggle for you? And how would you maybe talk to a parent who feels like, I'm worried because I don't see a lot of my daughter successfully in musical theater, or people who look like my child?
The answer to that question really is very nuanced and specific, right? My parents grew up in a community where they were a majority identity, right? West Miami has been settled for 50 years by predominantly my people, like the Cubans. And so my parents do not have, without a doubt, my mom worked for a multinational company. She's a woman. She has plenty of experiences being othered and not given her due. But it's a very different experience of some of the parents who are listening, who truly are experiencing on a much more regular basis what it's like to be excluded, lost in translation, marginalized, right? They have very justified concerns about their daughters and sons in these institutions. And the one thing that I will tell you from that I've learned from the older non-white mentors in my life, especially the parents, is they've got accumulated experience. They've got that deep wisdom of a life lived. They are ones whose body will tell them, give them very clear signals when they visit a school. They don't need me, me to tell them to trust that. They know it because they've kept themselves alive in this in this country, on this planet. I'll just share that I remember the first election when it was Hillary against Trump. It was an older African American woman who saw one of his rallies in South Carolina and leaned over to me and said, "He's going to win." And I remember being naive, and my life experience was quite different. I was like, there's no way, there's too much. But her bodily wisdom was like, I've been around these parts. I know this country. There's danger there, and there's people who relate to that. Now, that is not in any way, I haven't been in any schools that feel anywhere near that precarious as like compared to a Trump rally. But I would say uh, visit campuses, talk to faculty, um, and be honest with your daughter and son, as you've always been, about what's coming up for you, because that'll help prepare them, if you do decide it's worth giving it a shot, because there's a lot of value also in a lot of these places.
What about if we transition a little bit into some young professionals? What if, let's say, I'm out of school, I'm a young person trying to navigate this like post-pandemic landscape. I maybe want to talk especially about, let's say I am a social justice minded artist and I want to hold institutions accountable for the promises they've made. But I'm also kind of trying to navigate that like supply and demand economics of like, there's so many actors and I don't want to be trouble, right? I feel like I see a lot of young alumni kind of with the warring instincts of like, I want to speak up and hold people in power accountable, but also I'm still kind of like learning my place as an actor, whatever that means in the course of a process. And I think those lines don't draw themselves clearly. So what would you do, or what advice might you give, having done some of this? How would you navigate those sort of warring instincts to like not make trouble, but also to stand up for the things you believe in?
Yeah, I mean, man, I guess the first thing, and I probably should have said this before every answer, which is like, I can only draw on my experience, and I'm a grain of sand at the beach. So please reference what I'm sharing with other people in your lives who have an analysis on this stuff and who have a perspective on it, and I hope you get some diversity of opinion so that you can make up your mind, because you can't see me, but I have a very specific body and I've come from a specific place. And so these things land on me in a specific way, and it may not be parallel to the way that it is for you. Um, I often think about my own decision to, at 17, decide I was going to try to monetize the thing that made me happiest in the world, which was play acting. And there's a lot of implications about that. I'm not saying I regret it. And I certainly am not saying that I don't encourage it. I am where I'm at now because I made that decision, and actors and theater people are my tribe. So I wouldn't change a thing. But I'll tell you this, I did change my mind on one thing that's worth being transparent about. When I was young, I was that sort of artist who said, I only want to pay my bills acting. I said, I only want the checks to be written for me as an actor. And I did that. I did that for a few years, but I quickly realized what a corner that painted me in particular with what you're talking about, with the sorts of jobs and sacrifices and compromises that would entail. When you build a little bit of latitude and flexibility, and some of us have it due to safety nets that we were born with. That is, you can call it a privilege, you can call it a blessing. Some of us have the opportunity to go back home and lick our wounds and change careers. Some of us have the resources to go back to grad school. Good. I'm glad for that. Like, I don't begrudge that. Some of us are walking a thinner tightrope, but if you say this is the sole stream of income that I need to put food in my belly, that's going to really limit the amount of latitude you have. Because to be in a position where you don't want to make trouble, I think of the late John Lewis, right?
John Lewis.
Good trouble, right? Like, some of these spaces need to be troubled. Some of them need to be disrupted. Some of them need to be interrupted. And to put yourself in a position where you don't have that option. And I get it. We got to eat. So I'm not here to say you shouldn't feel that way. Some of us feel that way for good reason, because we got to eat and we got to pay rent. But I would just say, like, hey, think about the way that narrows your options, because the more of a wide berth you give yourself, the more you're going to be able to really opt in, to be able to remember that no is a love word. I learned that from Pierce Freelon in Durham. No is a love word. And Adrienne Marie Brown, who's a great author and teacher of mine, says that no creates the container within which you can give an authentic yes. And so being able to build a container with like, no, thank you, I'm not going to take that. No, thank you. Lupita Nyong'o has a great article after she graduated from Yale where she said, I was only going to take auditions that I knew were for me. And when I got an audition that I thought there was someone else who could do it better, I would just say, no, this is for someone else. And she did all right.
She did all right. That's so true. What about people, I think there's really good advice that people will give. Like, if you're not seeing yourself represented in this industry, go write that story. So let's imagine you've been given that advice. For those students who want to venture into those like multi-hyphens that you have navigated, do you have any advice for those people who want to try to tell their unique story in the world and how they might be able to go do it?
Yes. I can just say two things. One is, this is a secret that it took me too long to learn. Most good writing happens in revision. And I learned that from people who write poetry, who write plays, who write screenplays. There's a part of us that has this critical brain when we put a pen down or we start typing on a laptop that makes us think we've got to be Susan Laurie Parks when we're writing our first scene, or Kenneth Lonergan, or probably Kenneth Lonergan's first drafts are whack too. But what Kenneth Lonergan and what Susan Laurie Parks and what Lynn Nottage have learned is they can't edit anything that they haven't written. So fill the page, fill the camera. Your process of finding your voice will be iterative, and you can only begin it by making work. Make it. And then the second thing is find community. Find people who are at your place of competence and just above your place of competence. You don't want to be in writers groups with people who are being produced on Broadway when you're just starting. You also don't want to be with middle schoolers, right? You want to be with people who are in your level and just around the bend. Maybe they've finished a full-length play and you're writing your first one, right? And share. People think about art making as or especially writing as a solitary endeavor, and it can be for periods of it, but there's also great communities of solo practitioners, writers groups, people who give feedback on work, people who will read your drafts and share feedback on it. So just compose, write, generate. Don't worry until you look at it again the next day. And then second is find your people, share your work, get feedback.
Unbelievably, I have like 10 more questions to ask you, but we have to, just for time, skip ahead to the second game that we're going to play because I'm too excited I created this game and I wanted to play with you. So what I came up with was a different kind of game. It's a multiple choice style trivia game. And this is based on the premise that you and I both have famous name doppelgangers. You in the great A-Rod, who's a baseball player and J-Lo's beau, and me in the hilarious Charlie Murphy from The Chappelle Show, Eddie Murphy's brother, R.I.P. So I'm going to give you the facts about an individual, and you have to guess, is this a fact about A-Rod, Charlie Murphy, me, or you? Does that make sense?
I feel really confident in this game. Go ahead.
I think you might get 15 for 15. We'll see how you do. Are you ready?
Yeah.
This person is the third player ever to make the 40-40 club. 40 home runs, 40 stolen bases.
Alex Rodriguez, the baseball player.
100%. This person had a cameo role in Night at the Museum.
Charlie Murphy. The
100% true, yes. This person spent his childhood in Miami.
Both me and Alex Rodriguez.
100% true. This person's middle name is Quentin.
Charlie Murphy.
This person occasionally plays third base. That's correct. Yes. Occasionally plays third base, though it's not his first position.
Played, because he's retired, but Alex Rodriguez.
And Charlie Murphy.
Oh, no!
I got you on one. Okay, that's for the Broadway Show League. I play third base, even though it's not my position. Okay. Was often asked the question, what did the five fingers say to the face?
Oh, that's Charlie Murphy.
And me. You keep forgetting me. Okay, great. It's true, of course, for both of us. This person once dated Kate Hudson.
Alex Rodriguez, the baseball player.
And me,
no,
exactly. No, that one was a joke. Okay. This person made his film debut in Harlem Nights.
Charlie Murphy.
This person spends his nights in Harlem.
You, Charlie Murphy.
100% correct. This person is a two-time NYC intramural basketball champion.
Me and you.
Yes, 100% correct. This person once did a play with Billy Porter.
Me.
100% correct. Once worked on a TV series, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Whoa. Charlie Murphy?
Charlie Murphy is correct.
Wow.
This person once went as a Ninja Turtle for Halloween.
That's definitely you.
100%. Bonus points. Can you name that turtle?
You went as probably Leonardo.
No, you almost had it. It's Donatello. Donatello is correct.
It's either the leader or the intellect. I didn't know.
Correct. This person once dated Cameron Diaz.
Oh, that's Alex Rodriguez.
This person is godfather to the greatest baby in the world.
That is, without a doubt, undeniably, absolutely, irreconcilably, unequivocally me.
Actually, I have down A-Rod. See, Solvay, we went to the doctor, and Solvay is only the 80th percentile of greatest baby.
No.
Couldn't believe it.
I vehemently disagree with this.
You disagree? They did height, weight, and greatest, and it was only 80th. It's so interesting. Okay, I know we're going to have to let you go, but before, maybe in a final question, because I'm about to give your social media hashtags, I just want to throw out there a little bit of like, what do you feel like social media's influence on all of this is, right? The idea of like so many of these conversations as they happen in social media, as opposed to maybe in facilitated spaces that you're helping lead or that other people are helping lead. How do you feel before people go and follow you that social media is maybe influencing some of these conversations?
Wow, it's funny. You're like, we have 5 minutes. Let me ask you an incredibly bottomless, multifaceted question.
Good luck. You can do it.
I mean, in myriad ways, many of which I'm only semi-conscious of. It is, I believe, it is a tool, but like most tools and technologies, it ends up resembling both the beauties and also the biases of the people who wield them. I think the things that I really appreciate about it is it's a democratizing tool. I'm able to connect with my cousins in Cuba, which I never was. I'm able to, when I was living in New York, I was able to, FaceTime with my little nephews and nieces as they grew up. I can see Solvay. It is also a great amplifier. The Issa Rae model is possible because of social media. But the thing that I think, is worth paying more attention to. And there's some great scholarship around it, right? Like even I just read a book that's like 30 or 40 years old called Amusing Ourselves to Death that was about television. So the idea that the medium becomes the message, right? Like our communication, we think our communication warps the platform, the message warps the platform, but actually the platform ends up warping the message. And so we end up talking in shorter thoughts. We end up associating people by their name and their profile picture, forgetting that they are complex universes inside. We end up associating ourselves with literally groups that we're a part of. These algorithms push us in those directions because they're about keeping us engaged, and literally just knowing the economics of these social media is a great teacher, right? They're trying to keep your eyeballs. They're trying to get your clicks so that they can sell more expensive ad space. And so there are forces that are at work behind the scenes, and they make themselves invisible, that you may be okay with, but you also may not like their influence if you really think about it. So I would say, as with most technologies, a critical distance is what I'm trying to have. By that, I mean like trying to catch my breath before I use it, remind myself why I'm using it, and also catch my breath after I use it to put that tool aside and go back to living my life as a human, as a member of this human species. And I think that is making it more and more likely that I'm able to use them for the good that is in their potential, and try to mitigate some of the influences that thin out our experiences, thin out our debates, our discussions, and make us unhappy.
Well, with that, we will give out at Adventures with Ale, with ALEJ, on Instagram if you want to follow Ale personally, and at Alejo Alejocomm, ALEJOCOMM, if you want to follow his professional account. Is there anything else you wanted to really hit about Alejo Com before we let you go?
Yeah, no, if you're someone or know someone who's looking for some help having tough but important conversations, please hit me up. In fact, if you follow any of those accounts due to listening to this podcast, I'd love for you to message me, say hi, let me know this is how you heard from me. Maybe there's something you want to talk more about. I'd love that. But Alejo.com is really about offering support for folks who want to keep having conversations like this at work, or maybe communicate what they feel in clearer and more compelling ways to others. I got you. Let's talk. So hit me in the DMs one way or another. And I hope I see you in 3 dimensions also sometime soon.
Ale, I feel the same way. I hope I see you in 3 dimensions sometime very soon. I love you so much, man. Thank you for coming on the pod. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ale. I think he is quite simply the best. We went so deep and wide on a number of different topics that I actually don't want to zoom in on any specific one that we talked about. And I would never take the last word from him, too, after all that eloquence. But in general, I'm just going to say that I think it is our responsibility as people of privilege on this pod to keep having these conversations. Occasionally, they will be uncomfortable, and we will, of course, slip up and step wrong in talking about these kind of things, especially as we get farther from our own experience. But I do want to keep having a number of diverse perspectives on these conversations on the podcast and try to keep these conversations in the air, especially in our artist series. So we're going to take some risks and try to continue to discover and learn ourselves and learn in real time, and hopefully try to model that for you all out there as well. Some of the questions I ended up cutting for time because we were running so far over, and Ale was generous to stay for us for 30 minutes longer than he was going to. Went a bit deeper into like what our responsibility as white artists are and white citizens in these moments. And I know it's a question many of you are struggling with and the world is kind of reckoning with right now. And I guess I would just charge everyone out there, if you haven't deeply considered it yet, to at least ask that question of yourself. I think that's what we're trying to do here. And that was one of our missions in starting this pod, was about demystifying this college process and increasing access. And obviously, we are not going to do everything to solve everything on this podcast. That's not what we're going to be able to accomplish in this forum. But I do think we can try to be another drop in the ocean that is moving the tide in the right direction. At least that is our goal. Well, if you support that goal and you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more, please hit that follow button, subscribe to us wherever you are. We also would love it if you drop a comment wherever. We know you've already all rated and reviewed us, but after you've rated and reviewed us, drop us a comment. Let us know what you think. We'd love to kind of hear from you, especially in that medium. And if you have not shared it with friends that you know that might enjoy this pod, please do give it a share. We'd really appreciate that. We suggest when you're rating and review us, if you give us 5 stars if you believe Ed Norton went to Juilliard, and an ironic 5 stars if you just love correcting people for being wrong, you can also reach out to us directly with questions for the pod at mailbag@mappingthecollegeaudition.com. If you're interested in working with MTCA for help with your individual prep for your college audition journey, please check us out at mtcollegeauditions.com. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, go find yourself a Stockton who makes you feel like a Malone, on stage, on the court, and in life. We'll see you next week.